Alright, photo nerds, today we're going to be talking about shutter speeds. And there's a really cool Canon G12, and it's only thing wrong with it, it's got a compact sensor in it. But what's cool with it, I mean by compact I mean a really tiny sensor in it. So that kind of limits what its capabilities are right there. Alright, what's really cool about the Canon G12 is that you can set your shutter speeds and your apertures. And this is a Photo Universe whiteboard lesson regarding shutter speeds. Shutter speeds. Okay, let's go back to our venerable Pentax MX from 1977. And we have two controls. We have apertures around here and shutter speeds over here. Because when you pick your film, you get to, the film dictates what your ISO is. And these are the main controls in photography that dictate what your exposure is going to be. So you can, you can shoot at a wide open aperture at a fast shutter speed, or you can shoot at a small aperture at a slow shutter speed. Those really are your choices. I mean, that's all your creative control. We already have a video out there on apertures, so now we're going to do a video on shutter speeds. So, what is a shutter speed inside your camera? You have a sensor. In front of the sensor, you have a curtain. You have a lens in front of that. Okay? Here's the world, here's the sun on a sunny day, right? So the sun, see, shutter speeds, there we go. The sun reflects off of your subject, goes through your lens, and is blocked by the curtain. So when you set a shutter speed, let's take a 60th of a second. That's 1/60th of a second. This curtain opens up for 1/60th of a second, lets the light hit the sensor records that. Now, what is 1/60th of a second? Well, you take 1 second and split it up into 60 parts. That's how slow, that's how fast 1/60th of a second is. Now, what will 1/60th of a second do for you? Pretty much with a normal lens, it'll stop motion. So kids running around and stuff, and you'll get a sharp shot with a 50mm lens. Okay? So that's an example of the 60th of a second. Now, let's talk about some shutter speeds. So, the rule of thumb for hand holding your camera is you want 1 over the focal length that you're shooting with. Okay? So for example, if we're shooting with a 50mm lens, which in 35mm would be full frame, we want 1 over 50. So what does that approximately equal to, right? That approximately equals 1 over 60, 1/60th of a second with a 50mm lens. Now with an APS crop camera, 35 is your normal lens, okay? So 1 over the focal length equals 35mm is the focal length. That's your lens, right, that you're shooting with. So 1 over 35, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about 1/30th of a second. 1/30th of a second. For hand holding, that means it means under that. So 1/30th of a second and under. What's under 1/30th of a second? 1/15th of a second. And 1/8th of a second. And 1/4th of a second. Right? All the way down, anything slower than 1/30th of a second, we need to put it on a tripod. Rule of thumb. Okay? Yeah, but Photo Universe, my camera has image stabilization, and it's supposed to give me 3 stops. Well, what does that mean? Well, start at the beginning. You're shooting with a 35mm lens, 1 over the focal length, 1/30th of a second is hand holdable. I've got image stabilization on, and that's supposedly going to give me 3 stops. So there's 1 stop, there's 2 stops, there's 3 stops. In theory, with image stabilization, right? In Nikon, it's VR, vibration resistance, I guess. Whatever. The Pentax has in-body stabilization. You can hand hold your photographs with a 35mm lens down to 1/4 second. Now, you know, this is kind of fuzzy. It's not exactly accurate. You know, the best way is to experiment. I mean, you're going to get a sharper shot at 1/4 second on a tripod than you are with image stabilization, but you'll get a usable shot possibly with them. I mean, definitely 2:1, you know, for sure. Okay, so that's image stabilization. All right. Now I'm going to give you some brief rules of thumb, so what you're photographing. Okay, let's start with slow shutter speeds on a tripod, right? So let's say we want to do a waterfall. All right, waterfall. You want to have a shutter speed like, you know, 1/8 of a second, 1/4 second, 1/2 second, or even slower, right? Because that'll blur the water. Now you better be on a tripod. Okay, is that in the frame? Yes. Okay, so there's a waterfall. Let's say we want to do some fast action stuff, right? We're going to shoot sports, kids runnings and things. Probably 1/500th and better. Okay, to stop the action. 1/2000 will stop a helicopter blade. Fun to play with, but you don't really need to do it because helicopters look better if the blades are blurred. If the blades aren't moving and they're up in the air, they look silly. So anyway, there's some ideas about shutter speeds. You know, give it a try, experiment, play with it. And one other thing I would recommend, there are only three things in photography that affect your exposure and give you creative control. And that's shutter speeds and apertures. What you need to do is start at 4 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second, 1/2 second, 1/4, 1/8, 15th, 30th, 60th, 1/25th. Memorize that. It'll only take you a few weeks. Memorize. Well, you get the idea. Memorize that. It'll only take you a few weeks, just like apertures. Memorize your apertures. Memorize your ISO scale. Find out what full stops are. This is full stops. It's like in music, you've got 7 scales, right? Well, in photography, you only have 3. Memorize them. It's not that hard. So there you go. And if you memorize shutter speeds and you memorize your apertures, memorize your scales, learn how they interact, then you are absolutely a photographer. Because those are your creative controls. Your most basic creative controls. That's Ed with Photo Universe. Hopefully we're learning something. If you have any comments or questions, put them in the comments. Questions in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them. And subscribe if you like this stuff. Talk to you later.